Thank you so much for coming back, man. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. So, how did you first initially get inspired by Jelly Roll Morton and
Yeah,
wind up writing
so
this book?
well, what happened was it was at a period when I was in Los Angeles. I'd actually gone out there to work on Mexican rap music. And so I was listening to a lot of Los Angeles rap. And at that point, suddenly they reissued for the first time ever the complete Jelly Roll Morton Library of Congress recordings, which were recorded back in 1938 and 39.
Mhm.
And they included a bunch of material that had not been released until the 1990s because it was considered obscene. And the fact was, it sounded a lot like what I was hearing bumping out of all the cars that were driving past me in Los Angeles. And that just got me thinking how much of that world um, had always been there. I mean, all sorts of people were going, "Oh my God, this new rap stuff is horrible. They're using all this terrible language. There's all the violence, there's all the misogyny, not like the good old music we used to have." And there was Jelly Roll Morton talking about what he'd been singing in 1907.
Mhm.
And it was not just equally extreme, it was identically extreme. And so I got to thinking, okay, so that suggests that there's always been all of this culture that was happening, and it just couldn't be printed or put on records. And I began wondering how much of the history of blues was just the censored history, and how much of the uncensored history we could find. And that wasn't just about, finding dirty language, because
Mhm.
one of the things on the Jelly Roll Morton recordings is this thing that got titled Alan Lomax, who was the folklorist who recorded it all, titled this thing "The Murder Ballad" generically. Um, but it's a ballad, it's a blues ballad, a 12-bar blues narrative ballad that the whole thing isn't there. He starts partway in, but what's there is half an hour long and 52 verses.
Yeah.
And it's the only epic narrative blues ballad ever recorded. And I'm a blues historian, and there's a world of blues historians, and none of us knew that there were ever such things as epic ballads in 12 bar blues form, because the only one that ever got recorded was hidden away because it used words like fuck. And so that was really the spur, was the fact that it's not just that they censored the language. It's that there's a lot we don't know because that whole world has been censored.
Yeah. So they had just released that in the 90s?
Actually, they released the songs for the first time.
Uh-huh.
Like 1997. They released the complete recordings for the first time in 2003.
Oh, wow. Holy cow.
So yeah, it had been forever. I mean, there had been uh, versions that people thought were pretty much complete. I mean, the
Yeah.
first time they released the Jelly Roll Morton recordings, it was on in 78 albums
Hmm.
with I don't know how many 78s. And then it was a series of like 16 LPs,
Yeah.
was how I first came across it.
Wow.
Um, I mean, it's 80 hours of
Oh,
material.
holy cow. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they just kind of had this like locked up for a while in the Library of Congress.
Well, as I say, they had released, like these 16 LP sets, but
Hmm.
they had just left out five or six songs. I mean, it's interesting because I mean, Jelly Roll Morton never cursed in the course of the Library of Congress recordings.
Hmm.
It's strictly something when he talks about the kind of blues they used to sing
Hmm.
in the bars. He then will sing stuff that uses, the language people used in bars,
Hmm.
as opposed to him, he's talking using the language one uses in the Library of Congress.
Yeah. Man, yeah, it's fascinating when you start getting into it because you do a great job of like finding like the roots of some of these songs, kind of tracing down like where they originally came from. First one I think that you kind of go through is Alabama Bound, which is really really cool.
Well, that's where the Jelly Roll Morton, that's where the Library of Congress recording started. It's actually kind of a funny story because people always assume, I mean, it was Alan Lomax, the great folklorist, and they assume he went out to record Jelly Roll Morton.
Hmm.
And it's exactly the opposite. Some people brought him down to hear Jelly Roll Morton. Jelly Roll Morton was introduced to him. And then Jelly Roll Morton went to the Library of Congress, went to Alan Lomax and said, I know the entire history of jazz. You should record me. And
Wow.
Lomax's reaction was, we're not here to do jazz. That's pop music. We're a folk, we're a folklore department.
Yeah.
But he said, do you know Alabama Bound, which he knew was one of the earliest blues. And he said Jelly Roll Morton sat down at the piano and played him the most beautiful version he'd ever heard of Alabama Bound. And then he began thinking, okay, let's see what else he's got.
Yeah.
Um, but in a way, I mean, if a jazz fan had done the Jelly Roll Morton project, it would be completely different
Hmm.
because what Morton was most proud of was his jazz work from the 1920s, and they would have concentrated on that.
Yeah.
But because Lomax wasn't interested in jazz and was a folklorist, he wanted to know, so what were you listening to when you were growing up? What were you listening to when you were a teenager? What were you listening to when you were playing in the joints down the Gulf Coast before you got into jazz?
Hmm.
And the amazing thing about Morton is all the people who kept doing blues moved with the times. So when they were recording blues in 1925, 1930, 1940, they were keeping up with the current hits. I mean, if you listen to like Leadbelly, someone like that, we
Hmm.
think of him as an old time folk singer,
Yeah.
but when he sang blues and they'd said, what were the old blues like? He'll start singing you hits from 1928, 1929, because he's been keeping up with the times.
Hmm.
But because Jelly Roll Morton had quit doing blues and got into jazz and became a jazz, instrumental composer and band leader, his idea of blues was like this thing preserved in amber from before the first blues hits, before the first blues records. And it's very different.
Yeah, that's fascinating how they kind of got started. Like he went into to do jazz and promote that, but ultimately got steered into this whole blues history.
Yeah, and there are people who will criticize Alan Lomax for that, who will say,
Hmm.
you got him to sing all these dirty songs from Storyville when you had this guy who was the, the first great jazz composer.
Hmm.
And you're not asking him anything about how he put together these compositions that influenced everybody who came after him.
Yeah.
You had this major important figure and you didn't ask him anything about the stuff that's important about him. And instead you had him singing all these dirty old blues songs. And I understand the complaint, but
Yeah.
I'm also phenomenally grateful because the fact is there were lots of jazz experts who were interviewing New Orleans jazz guys about jazz.
Yeah.
And this is the only document. I mean, that's not quite true. One of the exciting things of this project, I spent 12 years on this project, not
Oh wow.
flat out. I mean, I was
Yeah.
doing other things as well, but I was going to every archive,
Hmm.
every collection of the papers of early blues scholars, every interview I could find. I mean, I listened to, I don't know, hundreds of hours of tape. Um, and actually, more had survived than I imagined at the beginning. I mean, once I started looking for the stuff that hadn't been printed
Yeah.
or hadn't been discussed, there turned out to be much more than I had expected.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, you can tell like how much went into this book through the amount of detail that you use throughout it all. What were some of like the most fascinating facts that you started stumbling upon?
Well, one of the things that I found utterly fascinating, you know, one of the things about doing history is we think of history as being about the past, but you're always doing it in the present. And so history is always what interests us now. And so I was listening to all these interviews that jazz scholars had done with the early New Orleans jazz musicians. And these interviews have been available since, the 30s, 40s, and there've been dozens of books written using them. Um, but all the people writing books were interested in jazz. And there's this guy who they keep talking about called George the Rhymer. And his whole thing was freestyling rhymes about people in the moment as they went into clubs. He would like just start rhyming on people. And he was the most popular guy in the jazz world in New Orleans.
Wow.
But he was apparently not a good musician. He played a little guitar, a little bit of bass, but he'd often just like have a fake bass just strung with clothesline that he used as a prop. And so the people who did all these interviews, major, major jazz stars, people like Kid Ory were talking about, oh, yeah, I used to play with George the Rhymer. He was the most popular act in the district. And nobody ever mentioned it because he wasn't interesting. But now I was writing about it in the age of rap. And the fact that the most popular performer with jazz bands in the district was a guy who essentially did freestyle rap. Nothing had prepared me for that. And that Morton was also famous for that.
Yeah.
George Pops Foster, the bass player, said, that was where Jelly was great, was he could get off a rhyme on anybody. You just walk past the place that he was playing and he'd get off a rhyme on you. He could do it. I forget how he puts it. I mean, basically clean or dirty, but he had a more beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating when you start to like dive deep into some of those lyrics and you're like, holy cow, like that's dirtier or crazier than most of the stuff that you'll hear today, especially on the radio. And most people like you can tell them about it, but until they hear it, they're just like in
Oh yeah.
disbelief. They're like, nah, that doesn't exist. But man, like, yeah, they
Oh
go,
yeah. No, I mean, I don't know whether are we allowed to say
yeah,
all of
yeah,
this stuff on.
yeah, we can
Yeah.
say,
No, I mean, so when I told you, like in the 1990s, 1997, they put out the songs, but without the talking,
Mhm.
which is crazy because I mean, his talking is the most beautiful thing ever. I mean, just the flow of his voice. But anyway, they
Mhm.
put out the songs, and I was at that point writing for the Boston Globe,
Wow.
and I wrote a review of it, and I said
Mhm.
that the language is as extreme as anything in gangster rap. And I came in after the piece ran, and the guy who was sort of the punk rock, he'd come in doing punk rock, but Jim Sullivan, really, really good writer. And by then he was sort of, the rock guy of the Globe. And he was like, ha ha ha, you obviously haven't listened to a lot of gangster rap. And I was like, no, I'm talking about like I had that bitch, I had her on the stump, I fucked that bitch till her pussy stunk. And he was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, when people think of dirty blues, they tend to be thinking of all that double entendre stuff that came out on records in the 30s.
Hmm.
And that's the point. I mean, this isn't that.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that people, this is the way people talk in bars now, and they talk that way in bars in 1907.
Yeah, it brings up a good point, like how a lot of those songs you mentioned are kind of cleaned up and then sold to a different population of people or recorded by
Or,
like
or,
musicians
or
and like,
to the same population. I mean, one of
oh,
the
yeah, true.
funny things is that if once you start looking at the uncensored stuff, you find that some of the verses that people recorded, what was funny about them was that the listeners knew what the real verse was.
Ah, yeah.
Like Robert Johnson has a couplet, monkey and baboon playing in the grass. Monkey stuck his finger in that good Gulf gas. Now it was in the baboon's ass. Everybody knew that line. It was a completely common line. And there are a bunch of things like that that once I heard the uncensored, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Um,
Yeah.
like, okay. And the people who were hearing those records knew the dirty line. So it was funny. And the other thing is, sometimes even the uncensored stuff, they'll do things like that because it's funny.
Mhm.
Uncle Bud's got corn that's never been shucked. Uncle Bud's got daughters never been to Sunday school is funnier than saying got daughters that never been fucked. So sometimes even in the bar, you would do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, because everybody's kind of
These
in on
guys
it.
are entertainers. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's more surprising that way. Everybody's expecting you to say the dirty word, so instead you go the other way.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, one thing I should emphasize is this wasn't just about blues.
Mhm.
I mean, I say this in the book that, any collection of sea shanties that doesn't have the word fuck is a censored collection of sea shanties. Any collection of cowboy songs that doesn't have the word fuck is a censored collection of cowboy songs.
Mhm.
I mean, that's how people talked, and particularly in white culture, how men talked. Um, what was different about black culture, not all black culture by any means, but the black culture, blues culture, let's say, is that blues was specifically what was low down music. They were calling it low down music.
Mhm.
And it was not, cowboy songs, sailor songs, soldier songs are dirty songs sung in all male environments. But the blues was sung in always, largely in rooms where there were women, a lot of them sex workers, not all of them. Um, and the interesting thing in New Orleans is it was being sung, of course, by women, but also for women. And that was something it took me a while to notice. But every interview with, people like Louis Armstrong, Sidney Bechet, all of the guys who were around in that early period,
Mhm.
when they mention blues, it's always in the context of what they played for the women, meaning the prostitutes, after the customers had gone home, when the women would come out of the houses to relax, 3, 4, 5 in the morning.
Mhm.
That's when you would play blues. And once I got that through my head and start looking at the lyrics, you go, oh, yeah, actually, very few of the lyrics are about penis vagina intercourse because that's not interesting if you're a hooker.
Yeah.
It's about cunnilingus and lesbianism,
Yeah.
an awful lot of it. It's what you do on your time off for your own fun. And so that was also a big part of the book, was just trying to think of the music that I was finding as voices from a world from which very, very few voices were preserved.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some interviews and memoirs of New Orleans prostitutes. Every single one of them is a forgery invented by white men. Not a single one of them is authentic.
Oh, damn.
But when you get into the blues lyrics, you start getting, in fact,
Mhm.
authentic material from that world. And it feels very different.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were some of like the sources that you're kind of diving deep into along with this recording from the Library of Congress?
Along with the Jelly Roll Morton. Um, it was a mix. I mean, first of all, the earliest stuff, there were no recordings. I mean,
Mhm.
an awful lot. There were so the earliest stuff I found was like from 1907, 1908, which is really the beginning of blues.
Mhm.
I mean, the first historical solid evidence of blues is 1909, 1910.
Wow.
Um, but John Lomax, Alan Lomax's father, already had a recording device that he was using um, by 1908. And he was a lot of it looking for cowboy songs, but he was also looking for Black folklore.
Mhm.
But at that point, the recording device was very primitive, and he was just using it as a dictaphone. So he would record people, go home, transcribe the material from the cylinders, and throw them away. Because after you played them 5 or 6 times, they were getting to be inaudible anyway.
Mhm.
So he was strictly using them as an aid to transcription. So we don't have any of those recordings.
Oh, gotcha.
Um, so Lomax was one of the first places I went, John Lomax, because I knew he had preserved some uncensored cowboy songs.
Mhm.
And so I went through all of John Lomax's papers there at the University of Texas in Austin. And there was some pretty amazing stuff. I mean, there was stuff from prisons. There was quite a lot of Black stuff, uncensored. But the amazing thing was the first blues that survives that was ever collected, which is known as Dink's blues because he called it that. It was a blues he collected from a woman named Dink. And when he first collected it, he didn't yet call it a blues because that term wasn't yet around. But
Yeah.
in hindsight, it's the first 12 bar blues we have. And that one is interesting because he wrote out exactly what she sang and then he censored it. And we have both copies. So you actually can look line by line at how he censored her lyric. And it wasn't a dirty song.
Mhm.
I mean, she was using the word fuck like, that riverboat's coming round the curve, the fucking old pilot straining every nerve. She's just
Yeah.
using the word like we use it.
Yeah.
Um, and the interest, one of the things about a line like that is the line isn't fascinating in itself, but you always wonder when you're looking at a written transcript whether it's accurate.
Mhm.
Whether this white guy is actually writing down what the person who was singing really said. And for me, the fact that it has that word is a signal of authenticity
Yeah.
because he couldn't publish that. So the
Yeah.
fact that that's there makes me believe that he really was taking down what she said word for word. So, I mean, what got me fascinated was the censorship and getting past the censorship. But the more I looked at it, the more I got fascinated just by the extent to which I was getting beyond the layer of scholarship that had been published over the years.
Mhm.
And I should say, it's not like I'm the only person who's ever looked at any of this stuff. I mean, there were people like Chris Smith in England who had listened. I think Chris has listened to more of what is in the Library of Congress than anyone alive. And, there were people like Chris who I was getting in touch with and saying, hey, have you come across anything that would be of interest for this project?
Mhm.
And everybody was really, really helpful. Um, I mean, a bunch of scholars were
Yeah.
like, hey, yeah, you ought to look here. You ought to go to Kentucky. There's an archive in Kentucky. Look at what's at UCLA.
Mhm.
Um, there's this amazing collection at the Library of Congress. The guy who started the uh, the folklore department for the Library of Congress, Gordon. God, Gordon is one of his three names, and I'm of course going to completely space. Give me 1 minute,
Mhm.
um, and I will find it. But he started out writing for a column in a men's magazine called Adventure Magazine. and it was a column called "The Songs Men Sing." And what it was basically, all sorts of sort of rough and rowdy hobo songs and cowboy songs and all that sort of thing. And of course, he didn't have any uncensored material in there. But um, what he did was for years and years and years while writing for Adventure Magazine, Robert Winslow Gordon, that's his name. Um, he was every month in Adventure Magazine, he had at the bottom of his column, if you know any songs, send them to Robert Winslow Gordon at his home address, actually. And so for years and years, people were just mailing him song lyrics. And there are, I forget, 70 volumes of these things or something in the Library of Congress. I mean, it's a
Wow.
huge collection and they're indexed and it's beautiful. Um, and it included one volume that he called his Hell File that had all of the stuff that he
Yeah.
couldn't publish anywhere. And so I started with that, but then I started looking at all the songs that were in that and going back to the original letters that the people had written him who'd sent him those songs, with some of them talk about where they heard them and how they found them, and
Hmm.
so I mean that was a week out of my life. Um, so yeah, all sorts of things like that, and then there are all the interviews with the New Orleans jazz people, which thank God, 1950 or thereabouts, 4950, magnetic tape arrived,
Hmm.
and you could sit people down and actually have them talk for 2 hours, 3 hours. I mean, when Lomax was doing the Library of Congress recordings, every 4 minutes he had to change the disc.
Oh my God.
And that, first of all, is a lot of goddamn work
Yeah.
and is a constant interruption. So he actually had two machines, so he could switch between them if Morton was really on a roll. But also, it was very expensive.
Hmm.
I mean, you had to have all these discs, and he could do the Morton thing because he was in the Library of Congress. But it was not, you could like take this over to somebody's house and do it. Once you had magnetic tape, you could. And so in New Orleans, they started actually, particularly this guy named William Russell, um, began interviewing all these old guys. And some of the interviews, there are people who William Russell did, 30 hours, 40 hours of them singing songs and telling stories. And all of that stuff is either at Tulane or at the Historic New Orleans collection. And it's all, God bless it, not only available, but by now, I think pretty much all of it is available online.
Oh, cool.
Um, and so you can go through and listen and, for weeks, just whatever I was doing, I had my headphones on
Yeah.
and was just listening to these people talking infinitely. And very little of it was relevant to this project, but it also was just opening up a whole world, um, including, stuff that was completely irrelevant to this project, but that I found fascinating. I mean, um, George Lewis was the clarinet player of the old generation of New Orleans, who stayed in New Orleans.
Hmm.
Sidney Bechet, a bunch of other people left. Jimmy Noon, a lot of people left. But George Lewis stayed there. He was the original, like the Preservation Hall Jazz Band when they started that.
Hmm.
Lewis was the regular clarinet guy.
So what time
And
era was that? Was that like,
we're talking 1940. I mean, he started
okay.
playing, I forget, he probably started playing around 1910,
Wow. Yeah.
but he was still playing in the 50s.
Hmm.
But not only was he still playing in the 50s, his mother, Alice Zeno, was still around. She was like 90 years old. and they interviewed very few women, but which is a huge problem for my project and for history in general.
Yeah.
But they did interview Alice Zeno at some length, interestingly enough, in French. They started to interview her in English and quickly found out that she was more comfortable in French.
Wow.
So there were then several hours, like 3 hours of interview with her in French. And I do speak French. So I was listening to those. And she also spoke fluent German because when she was a teenager, they sent her out to work, uh, as doing household work for a German family in childcare. And so she ended up being fluent in English, French, and German without ever leaving New Orleans. Um,
Wow.
but
That's incredible.
and none of what she had in her interviews ended up in the Jelly Roll book. But one of the fascinating things was her mother, her grandmother, I guess, had been brought over, had been kidnapped and brought over from Africa,
Damn.
and still spoke, as she put it, African. And they asked, "Do you remember any of the African?" And she says, "Oh, I don't remember much of it, but good morning was assalamu alaikum." I had always been kind of suspicious of the claims of Muslims having been kidnapped
Hmm.
and brought. I mean, there's always been this argument
Yeah.
about whether Muslims were in fact not were brought over, were kidnapped and brought over as slaves.
Hmm.
There's the answer. There's her grandmother saying the way they said good morning in African was
Yeah.
assalamu alaikum. That's
Any
Muslim Arabic.
any like Moorish ties? Like,
Um, not strictly. I do understand we use these words loosely.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, what a lot of people mean when they say Moorish is just black Muslim.
Hmm.
But what if what we mean by Moors is North African? No.
Yeah.
I mean, the Muslims who would have been brought over would have been from Senegambia,
Okay.
from that area, from West Africa.
Man, that's
But
fascinating.
there
Yeah.
was lots of Muslims there already. As I say, I mean, most of us thought, yeah, there were Muslims there, but they were more urban
Hmm.
and not getting kidnapped and sent over as slaves. But there you go.
Yeah.
So it was an awful lot of this project for me. I mean, any project, if you do it right, only a tiny fraction of it ends up in the book.
Yeah.
I mean, in order to do a book, in order to write a decent history, you need to know infinitely more than you use. Um, if you don't know way more than you use, either you're going to make a lot of stupid mistakes because you don't have the background, or you're going to write a very boring book because you try to put everything into it.
Hmm.
So, I mean, what you try to do if you're going to write readable history is to immerse yourself to an unbelievable degree until you feel comfortable in that world. And then try to write it so it's fun to read.
Yeah.
Not try to put everything in there.
Yeah. Oh, and trust me, this book is one of the more fun books you can possibly read. I mean, there's so many cool little facts and lyrics just in general are are very eye-popping and just incredible, man. The amount of work that you put into it is amazing. So, like some of the people that you reached out to, was there anything that you kind of like possibly like missed that you were like surprised that they might have brought up?
Oh yeah, lots of stuff. One thing, if you're a serious historian, you are intensely conscious of how little you know all the time.
Hmm.
And you try to turn over every rock, but you know
Yeah.
that there are always more rocks out there. And one of the things about writing a book like this, and honestly, one of the things that has surprised me is I expected to get more letters. I got a couple, but I'm assuming they still will be coming in the future from people saying, "Hey, I just found this bunch of stuff."
Hmm.
But I mean, it does, somebody just wrote me a couple of weeks ago with something, and I was like, "Oh, damn, I wish I'd known that when I was doing the book."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there was a Howard Rye, who is the discographer of all blues and discographers. I mean, he's amazing. Um, I was looking at, see, I'm 66 years old now, and I'm losing all of my goddamn proper names. Um, I mean, I have a good memory still. I can still remember all the song lyrics, but I'm losing all the proper names. Gladys Bentley. Yeah,
Okay.
Gladys Bentley. She was a big star in New York, and she was famous for doing absolutely filthy material. She was a cabaret star. She recorded a couple of blues because if you were a black woman in 1927 or whatever, that was what they recorded. They weren't interested in pop songs. But what she mostly sang, she mostly worked white clubs and sang dirty parodies of pop songs, but really dirty.
Hmm.
Um, and she was famous for that. And I had found sort of rumors, stories about this, but had assumed that none of it got actually recorded. And then Howard Rye suddenly popped up saying, well, actually, she did this series of anonymous party records on the West Coast in the
Wow.
1940s, that were issued without her name on them. And I was like, really? Do you have any of those? He's like, sure. And he sent me, like, I forget, 8 uncensored, truly filthy Gladys Bentley things. They're not very good. I mean, they're the sort of stupid, dirty songs that you're not going to know these names, but the people like Belle Barth, who had a series of knockers up albums. I mean, there were all these dirty party records that circulated for white guys to giggle over.
Yeah.
And the stuff is stupid, but and the Gladys Bentley stuff was mostly of that ilk, but I had no idea it existed.
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, so you can actually hear this. And that came very late in the project. Don't think I think I like quoted a phrase or two from it, because there were a couple of phrases that were like, oh, okay, this is another example. Actually, what it was is there's almost no explicit stuff about male homosexuality. And
Interesting.
that I assume is simply because we don't have it.
Hmm.
Um, I'm, I mean, there was lots of blues stuff about lesbianism. And I'm assuming that's because there were lots of recordings of female blues singers. And that market was songs that sold to women. And so there were women who wanted that. And
Yeah.
so I'm not going to say there are lots of records of that, but there are probably a dozen.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, even the murder
whereas,
ballad, like
well,
the
Murder
chick
Ballad,
murders and goes to
yeah,
prison,
yeah,
becomes a
yeah,
lesbian. Like,
right. I won't even say becomes a lesbian. She's in prison, so she's with women, and that's what she does when she's
true.
in prison.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep in mind a lot of what we're talking about in this period. Uh, those things hadn't gelled as identities.
Hmm.
I mean, there were, to use the terminology of that world, fairies and bulldaggers.
Hmm.
But a man who had sex with a straight man, a normal man, whatever we're going to say, the terminology of the time
Yeah.
would have been a normal man,
Hmm.
um, might have sex with fairies. Fairies were considered, they were feminine men,
Hmm.
um, not trans, though some of them, that varies. There were some who might in the modern world, who would in the modern world probably be considered trans. Lots who in the modern world would simply, the terminology then was sissies. But You could be a straight man and have sex with sissies. That didn't make you gay. Um, that really doesn't happen till World War II. In that period, you start having the idea that if you're straight, you don't have sex with men. Not just, but that,
Yeah.
because in all male environments, you did. I mean, it didn't make you less masculine if when you were in jail, you fucked guys. To be fucked by guys, yes.
Yeah.
But those were not dividing lines. Those weren't like he's a gay guy, he fucks guys. No. And same way with women. I mean, it didn't make you a bulldagger if
Hmm.
you sometimes went with women. Um, and the reason all of this is not just a digression is that the songs about having sex with women were widely popular with a female audience. The songs about having sex with men, that was, as they say, on the down low.
Hmm.
Um, but there were clubs in New Orleans that were gay men's clubs or sissy clubs or whatever you want to call them. And Tony Jackson, who Jelly Roll Morton and everybody remembered as the greatest one-man entertainer in the district, was flamboyantly, openly gay. And there was a club that Morton talks about called the Frenchmans that everybody remembered as, oh, yeah, that's where Tony and his crowd, they would say, hung out.
Yeah.
The cooks, they would say.
Yeah.
Apparently, being a cook and the male cooks in the restaurants and the bars, that was a gay profession. Um, and I assume that there was material that was sung in those rooms.
Hmm.
And I assume that if Alan Lomax had asked Jelly Roll Morton for some of those songs, he probably knew some of them because he hung out at the Frenchman's and he was a big fan of Tony Jackson. But this is another thing. This would come up in conversation. Like Tony Jackson, I mean, Alan Lomax asks Jelly Roll Morton, was he a fairy? And Jelly Roll Morton says, I don't know, ferry, steamboat, one of those things. Um, but Lomax doesn't pursue it. And this was
Gotcha.
consistent.
Hmm.
Lomax, his father, John Lomax, the jazz guys, when homosexuality was mentioned, they would immediately change the subject.
Wow.
Male homosexuality.
Yeah.
So I assume that we don't have any of that, not because it wasn't there,
Yeah.
but because that really wasn't preserved. And I could be wrong about that. It's not being preserved. That's a perfect example.
Oh yeah, true.
Something that, I mean, I have a friend who has a friend who is black and gay and from New Orleans, and whose grandfather was black and gay and kept a journal,
Yeah.
but he doesn't want to share it. I mean, it's private family stuff.
Hmm.
Who the hell knows?
Yeah.
Maybe his grandfather has journal entries about songs that he heard in bars. I have no idea.
Yeah, it could possibly be
But
like one of those like using a different name or putting it out under a different name, possibly, or just
well, I mean, I know it wasn't recorded, but
Mhm.
whether it's in a diary, whether it's,
Yeah.
there was this, because the world of black gay entertainers uh, was a huge world.
Hmm.
I mean, Little Richard, and Little Richard is the tip of a very, very big iceberg.
Yeah.
I mean, Little Richard came out of a world of black gay cross-dressing
Hmm.
cabaret entertainers. And Little Richard's song Tutti Frutti, his first big hit, the original lyric was Tutti Frutti, good booty. If it fits, don't force it. You can grease it, make it easy. It's about anal sex, gay anal sex.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we know that material was there.
Hmm.
But the only reason we know that lyric is because he made it into a hit and lived long enough to do interviews where people would, where he'd say, well, they changed the lyric. The real lyric was.
Yeah.
But I mean, if Little Richard had died in 1970, we wouldn't know what the real lyric of that song was.
Yeah. It's absolutely fascinating how like that part of history can be, I guess, preserved through music and through lyrics and
Yeah.
passed down.
Yeah, no, that was part of what fascinated me about this was, I mean, nobody was writing books out of that world. Nobody was
Yeah.
writing magazine articles out of that world, but they were doing the songs.
Yeah, seriously, props to you for like putting that out there and preserving, and bringing it out in this era and everything. It's really, really cool, man. Uh, Another fascinating person that I found through the book was Buddy Bolden.
Sure. Um, which, I have to say, I didn't come up with anything new on Buddy Bolden.
Hmm.
Buddy Bolden is one of the most thoroughly researched figures on the planet Earth.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, he was dead before anybody did the research, so there are limits.
Hmm.
But I mean, there are multiple books on Buddy Bolden, all with roughly the same material because it's all we've got.
Hmm.
I mean, he became famous as the man who invented jazz, which is wrong. Um, Everybody who is around in that world says Buddy Bolden didn't play jazz.
Hmm.
Um, he played ragtime and blues, which is a distinction people make because jazz got to be the name for the stuff people did with a lot of improvisation.
Hmm.
And that wasn't his thing.
Yeah.
But his thing was playing very hard, very loud. And he probably, I mean, see, here's the thing people forget. There wouldn't have been any singing or very, very little at a Buddy Bolden gig because it was a brass band and there were no microphones.
Hmm.
Very few people can sing over a brass band without a microphone,
Yeah.
and they sure as hell can't do it for very long. I mean, there were people who
Yeah.
were famous for being able to do that, but it was very rare.
Hmm.
Um, so, I mean, he had all these pieces with dirty names, whether they had lyrics or not. Um, you know, whether like a song with a title like "All the Whores Like the Way I Ride." Um, when they made the movie, Wynton Marsalis put together the music, and the way he deals with all the whores like the way I ride is he figures the whole band just at a certain point in the tune, everybody just starts singing that in unison. And that's very possible.
Hmm.
But we don't know. There's no recording
Yeah.
that's that way. Now, Wynton Marsalis grew up in that world. I did not manage to reach him. I did make it the try to say, was that an idea you had that was probably what they did? Or was that something that the older heads told you? I don't know. But something like that seems likely. But there also were people who were in his band who were famous for singing filthy songs, uh, particularly a couple of his guitarists. And they would probably like do it on a band break. You know, they were the guitarists. So
Hmm.
like when the band took a break, they might sit with the guitar, wander around the room, go up to the tables, make some tips,
Kind of like
singing
Buddy
some
Guy
dirty
does now,
songs.
or used to.
Well, I'm talking about with no amplification.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like that's where it kind of
And
that style originated. Was
well, I mean, that was one of the things you did in a noisy bar. I
Mhm.
mean, Duke Ellington talks about how he and Sonny Greer, who was the drummer, uh, would do after hours work with a little piano on wheels that you could take around the cabaret and just wheel it from table to table and just do little songs. I mean, I made my living that way for years,
Hmm.
working cafe bars, no microphones, busking. And what I would typically do is go around um, every corner playing a couple of quieter things, and then you do a couple of loud things for the whole room and pass the hat. Um, but yeah, I mean, that was always part of the gig. I mean, you still, if you go to Mexico, um, that's the whole mariachi thing. If you're
Hmm.
at an outdoor cafe,
Yeah.
trios and mariachis will come up and you have to pay them. Pay them $5 for a song and they'll do you a song. And yeah, they were doing that back in New Orleans.
Yeah, it's really crazy like how far back some of this stuff really goes. Yeah, you even trace back the word funk to like come the stink from body odor like on ships.
Yeah,
I guess it's brought up through the song Funky Butt or something
right.
like that.
The song that's a famous song, but then you start looking, a lot of times you can't find stuff, but sometimes you can.
Hmm.
And there was indeed this thing from talking about traveling over to the Americas in steerage. And I forget like how early it is, 1690, 1710. So, early, early. And somebody's talking about the funk from the bodies. It's like, whoa, okay. Um, Booty is that's the most fascinating one. That's the one legit discovery
Yeah.
I've ever made in slang. Um, and that was because, I mean, I'd always understood booty to be just sort of hindquarters, buttocks.
Hmm.
And you'll see it defined as buttocks. And if you think of, yeah, buttocks, buddy, booty, sure, that makes sense. But Mance Lipscomb, blues player from Texas, he said booty with a D. And he said specifically that means asshole. Your booty,
Yeah.
keep your booty clean, which is the phrase that still survives. I mean, you still find that in rap, keep your booty clean.
Yeah.
And by God, I was looking at, for another project, a book of Caribbean slang. And there was booty being used to mean asshole
Hmm.
in the Caribbean. And there, someone had glossed it to West Africa. And it's Budi or Buddha, and it means anus. I mean, it means
Look out.
literally shithole, Buddha.
Yeah.
And so there you go. I mean, that's the only, everybody tries to trace slang.
Hmm.
That's the only thing I've ever successfully traced on my own.
Yeah. That is wild. What time frame
But,
was that uh traced back to?
well,
That's
I
absolutely
mean,
fascinating.
as far as anyone knows, it's whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
it's in several West African languages. I mean,
Wow.
Mandingo
Yeah.
uses the term Boda, and I think Wolof also. I'm not sure about Wolof. I think Wolof as well. And of course, once you think about it, the survival in the phrase "keep your booty clean,"
Hmm.
that's the kind of words that will get passed on from mothers to children and that they will not be learning in the white society around them.
Hmm.
I mean, that's the sort of word that grandmothers will pass on to grandkids
Yeah.
in the society that has come from Africa with a word that nobody's teaching them what the word for that is that white people use.
Yeah. You hear it all the time, to be honest, and you never think asshole, like they're talking
Right,
directly about
right.
that. Like
No,
that's
because, well,
wild.
then of
Yeah.
course you have metonymy and you start talking about getting some ass,
Hmm.
which getting some ass normally means getting some pussy if we're using
Yeah.
it in straight culture. I
Yeah.
mean, you start using terms more generally like that. But yeah, that, as I say, I mean, if Mance Lipscomb hadn't said booty with a D and specifically said it was asshole, I wouldn't have gone on this whole journey. But again, that's one of these examples. I mean, who gives a damn where a dirty word comes from?
Mhm.
But the fact that we have a legit West African linguistic survival that is still common Black slang, that's interesting.
Yeah.
One of the fascinating things about studying dirty language is it survives in oral culture in a
Hmm.
way. I mean, rap has changed that. Rap has led to, in fact, dirty language. Kids are learning their dirty words from commercial culture.
Hmm.
But that's only since the 1990s.
Yeah.
Some Rudy Ray Moore started that in the 70s. But I mean, when I was 12 years old and we were learning dirty words, the only place you could learn them was from other kids.
Yeah, that's true. That's how
And
I feel
the
like I
other
did.
kids are learning it from their older brothers, who learned it from their older brothers, who learned it from their older brothers. And none of us think of the grown-ups as using those words.
Hmm.
It's all secret language. And because of that, it's language that remains oral culture for centuries, while other oral culture is being affected by books and magazines and records.
Hmm.
That stuff remains real oral culture.
Yeah, it's insane. Another, I guess, going back to like the women in this area, Mammy's Blues. Would you like to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Mamie's blues, it's Jelly Roll Morton described as the first blues he ever heard. And this is a song that was everywhere. It was a prostitute's lament. Stood on the corner with my feet soaking wet. I was asking every man I met, if you can't give a dollar, give me a lousy dime. I just got to feed that hungry pimp of mine. Um, and that's another of these lyrics that once you start looking for it, um, partly because it it didn't have to use, they wouldn't use the word pimp. It might, on a record, it would say that hungry man of mine,
Hmm.
but it was recorded everywhere. And as a version also of a song called Tricks Ain't Walking No More. That was a prostitute's lament. It's like it's late at night or it's raining tonight and tricks ain't walking no more.
Hmm.
Um, and those songs, with whatever you call it, tricks ain't walking no more, or stood on the corner, or these things didn't have titles. This is another thing that
Yeah.
I had to remind myself of constantly is until you put it out as a record, it doesn't have a title.
Hmm.
It's just, they're just songs that people sing. Could you sing that one about the prostitute? Oh, yeah, sure. It doesn't have a title
Yeah.
and it could be different every time. But there was that verse about stood on the corner, can't spend can't spend a dollar, just give me a lousy dime. Um, Once I started looking, everybody remembered that
Wow.
as one of the earliest. Some people would say earliest blues. Some people would say, oh, yeah, they were singing that before blues.
Hmm.
Um, so, yeah, a lot of this, again, was coming out of the red light districts, but not for the entertainment of the customers.
Hmm.
It was the voice, it was the after hours singing about, you're tired. It's been a long night.
Yeah.
Um, the slow songs or about how tricks ain't walking no more. It's raining out, tricks ain't walking no more. We're in the bar now. Have another whiskey. We'll sing a couple more of the slow ones and then we'll go home to bed. Hope it's a better day tomorrow. It's voices from that world
Hmm.
that we are not going to hear anywhere else.
Yeah. You're an incredible historian, an incredible writer, also awesome musician. Do you have any advice for any upcoming writer, musician, artist you might want to give?
Um, I mean, look, these days, the first advice is stay the hell away from AI.
Hmm.
Um, and honestly, watch out for the internet. Um, because you can train yourself to have a short attention span. And if there's one thing this kind of work takes, it's a lot of goddamn time.
Yeah.
It's if you do a word search, you will, it will save you a lot of time and you will miss an unbelievable amount of stuff. And because if you're trying to do history, what you are looking for is a tiny fraction of what you need to know. And, now, for example, if you want to look through the Chicago Defender, which was the biggest black newspaper, for the blues record advertisements, you can do word searches and get right to the blues record advertisements and never have to leaf through the Chicago Defender week after week after week and find out what that world looked like.
Hmm.
Whereas in the old days, to find the blues record ads, we had to flip through the Chicago Defender week after week after week, year after year after year.
Hmm.
And while you're doing that, you find all this other stuff and you find out what that world looked like. And that, to do history, you have to immerse yourself. You can't just, it's like, think about archaeology.
Hmm.
The tomb robbers are just looking for gold that they can melt down.
Hmm.
And in the process of grabbing the gold, they're destroying all the information about where this came from and what else was in that grave site.
Yeah.
And when you do word searches, that's what you're doing. You're just grabbing out the gold
Yeah.
and missing all the other stuff that's in the grave site, which actually tells you what the gold means. Um, so really, I mean, that's my advice
Hmm.
is, I'd say, I'm not saying don't use the internet. I could not have done this book without the internet.
Hmm.
I mean, a huge part of what I did with this book involved census records, newspaper articles. But for example, you're searching for a person in a newspaper article. Woman I looked for named Ready Money. If you're going to do it right, you put in her name. You look for every story you can find that has her name. You read all of those stories. Every address it mentions, you then plug in that address and search that address. Every other person at that address, you then search them. And sometimes you'll spend a week and you won't find a single thing you want to use. But that's not a wasted week. That's a week of learning what that world looks like.
Hmm.
And that's the real process of history is learning what the world looks like. Like if you're going to write a book about something happening now, you know what the world around you looks like.
Yeah.
And if you want to write about something happening in the past, as much as possible, you need to have that same level of, yeah, I'm writing about that woman I see on the street there, but I can see the rest of the goddamn street. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Man,
Yeah.
that's incredible advice, man. I really appreciate it. Is there anywhere to find your work to purchase? Maybe your website or
Um, I don't sell it off my website. My website's a good place to find out what's there, and that's just ElijahWald.com.
yeah.
In terms of buying books, um, what I'm going to say is if you read ebooks, which I don't, go direct to the publisher. Don't go to goddamn Amazon. And if you want physical books, go to bookshop.com. bookshop.org. Is that what it's called? Hold on. Let me make
Mhm.
sure I've got this right because they keep changing the name.
Yeah.
Um, which I think bookshop.org. If it isn't right, we'll get you there, but I'm going to try. Yeah, bookshop.org.
Okay.
And what bookshop.org does is it's an online bookseller like Amazon, but unlike Amazon, it pays to local bookstores.
Oh, cool.
You can you can either just say pay to a local bookstore, or you can pick your local bookstore,
Yeah.
and it will order you the book from the bookstore and keep the goddamn bookstores alive.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there is no substitute. Again, okay, this is the other, go to libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And if you possibly can, don't just order the book you want, find it on the shelf, because the book next to it may, in fact, be more helpful than the one you're looking for.
Oh, yeah.
The other books that are about that stuff will be sitting next to it on the same shelf. And
Mm-hmm.
it's getting harder and harder, even at universities.
Yeah.
I was working at Temple University. They've automated their goddamn library. If you
Oh,
want a
damn.
book now, you can look it up in the electronic catalog and you punch a button and it comes out to you.
Mm-hmm.
But you no longer see the shelf with all the books that were next to it.
Oh, damn.
And
Yeah.
if you complain about this, they'll say, yeah, but we have all these other search words and you can search all the other things. That's not how the world works,
Yeah.
because you'll have all these new books on the shelf. And then on the shelf, there'll be this one really old book that looks like nobody's taken it out in like 50 years. And that's the one you want to be looking at.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's there if you don't get to see the books.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, what I'd say is go to physical spaces, go to bookstores, go to libraries, pull things off the shelves, yet don't have to read. I'm not saying read everything from beginning to end. Don't read everything from beginning to end, but go to physical spaces, talk to human beings. Um,
Yeah.
don't try to do this work on your screen.
Well, man, thank you for the wonderful book and just your preservation of history and just setting the scene from that time period, man. You did an excellent job, and I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Fun conversation. Take
Yes,
care.
sir.